in the NFL Draft, the Miami Dolphins have traded it to the Philadelphia Eagles. And with the 8th pick, the Philadelphia Eagles select
Ronnie Stanley out of Notre Dame.
Now, I have to admit, this is a controversial pick. I personally want to see more beef on this offensive line from new head coach Doug Peterson, who replaces Chip Kelly after believing he can insert anyone, even a lunch pail, to be an offensive guard. The first thing Howie Roseman did was get rid of everyone Chip Kelly brought in when he was not there. We saw DeMarco Murray go. We saw Kiko Alonso go. Thank God. We saw a couple different moves as well. Brian Maxwell said goodbye in his large contract. Eagle fans were hyped about him. And after game 1, not so much. After he got burnt by Julio Jones on almost every single play.
Yeah.
So Howie Roseman decided we're going to package Kiko Alonso to go with Byron Maxwell and move up a couple spots. They originally held 13. They're going to jump up to 8 and potentially get a good player.
Yeah, I mean, it was a great overall move. You got a cap dump. You moved up. You got rid of a player who might not have even fit your next system. You moved from a 3-4 to a 4-3 under the new defensive coordinator Jim Schwartz, which I'm pretty sure every single fan in Eagles territory is very, very, very happy about that. You need help though. You need help on line, and your offensive line is by far your biggest hole. Like you said, lunch pails couldn't really do it for us on their offensive line last season. You had 2 of them almost, not even just 1. You had basically 2, and overall, you saw a really, really, really poor offensive line. And I think Stanley will be a huge help to our cause. Not only, he's not the biggest guy. He's 6'6". He's only 312. It's not exactly the biggest hunk of meat you ever saw in your life at lineman.
Well, the biggest hunk of meat who we just brought in from Houston is the real deal. Brandon Brooks, 6'5", 346 pounds, and he will be your starting right guard. Now that's more like it.
Yeah, and that's definitely what you like to see. It was a great, great move by Howie Roseman. And Howie just took some shots from Chip Kelly. I'm pretty sure most of Eagles fans know about this now. But Chip Kelly basically said the whole thing was Howie Roseman's doing and Howie Roseman's fault. And almost took all of the blame off himself, which is quite amazing based on how he demanded to be the head of that GM spot, more or less. And not so much as a coach, as a GM. And that's not really true. And I don't know if, you can believe everything the Chip says. He's not exactly the most honest guy in America.
Well, with the offensive line, I think every Eagles fan can say last year was the worst year of his career in Jason Kelce. It really pained me to see snaps going over the quarterback's head and cost us games.
Yeah.
At the game, Jason Kelce against the Cowboys snapped the ball at least 10 yards over Bradford's head. And I cannot repeat the things I heard because it was just so dreadful to see. But now that you actually have 2 real guards next to him potentially in Stanley and Brooks to go along with Peters and Johnson, now Kelce might feel more comfortable not trying to do everything at the line. He can call out assignments. He's a veteran now. And he's going to have to show Stanley the ropes since he's used to being a tackle. But eventually Stanley will move out to tackle. Yeah. I think what eventually would happen in this scenario is that Lane Johnson would move the left tackle, and then you would slip Stanley out the right tackle.
And by that point, you'd have another guard to replace Stanley. Mm-hmm. Now, as Stanley is not the biggest guy, he's not a huge guard, but he's athletic.
Well, it's not a joke. He's 6'6", 312.
He's still big. He's still big, but he's not 6'5", 340. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the best parts about getting a big offensive lineman, regardless of what their weight is, he's still a big guy. But the best part about that is they can pretty much play. If they can play outside, they can play in the middle. And I'm real excited to have a good offensive line, all 5 starters. I mean, like he said earlier, Kelce did not have a good year.
No.
He did not by any means. Probably is one of his worst years as an Eagle.
But Collinsworth says it almost every time the Eagles play on Sunday Night Football. He's the best screen center and most athletic center in the league. This is true. He is 6'3", 282, but he can move. But I think more importantly, he's a good leader on the offensive line. That's why I had not lost faith in him. He has to have reliable players next to him. You have Jason Peters, who is a Hall of Famer in my book, 6'4", 328 pounds. Stanley, 6'6", 312. Kelsey, 6'3", 282. Brooks, who is a load at 6'5", 346. And Lane Johnson, 6'6", 310. You have at least 3 to 4 players right there that can all move and are athletic. That might be to the advantage with Peterson. You might see a lot more screens.
Yeah, and that's something that, when Chip did it, it was very forthcoming, and defenses keyed up on it almost right away. And I don't know if this might be a problem or not with Kelsey, more or less, but we're not running a fast-paced offense anymore. I mean, we're maybe some bits and pieces here and there. Peterson kind of brought that in a little bit. He talked about that a couple weeks ago. But other than that, it's not as quick. I'm expecting more power runs, power sets, more downhill running, and I don't know if Kelsey is big enough for that role. He's never really played the let's just push a whole pile down the middle of the field kind of guy. It's part of the reason why we almost never ran over center.
It's a good point, but yet again, you get Stanley in there, he's going to add you some beef, and that's going to be huge if you want to pound the ball north and south, especially with this new offense, as Peterson was the offensive coordinator in Kansas City under Andy Reid. Peterson also was a quarterback in Philadelphia at one point, so he knows how the city is.
Yep.
He knows the boos are going to be coming and things aren't going their way.
Oh, yeah.
But he also knows what it takes. He knows that sense of Philly, and he knows what the fans expect. They expect you to give it to your all.
Yeah.
And with that being said, philosophy-wise, he loves to get the tight ends involved. Now, they just gave a huge contract to Zach Ertz, who they're going to expect to not necessarily carry the load, but be a major piece to go along with Jordan Matthews in the passing game.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be an exciting time. You also, Howie Roseman is also putting a lot of faith in the guys who've been on the roster. Selleck also got a new deal, and that's not even diving into the defense. Now, as for this line that we're so embracing, you do need a running back, and I think that brings us to our next point, is depends who's available. That's why it's a controversial pick. If Elliott is there, it's not the worst thing in the world to pick Elliott. He is a good running back. It depends how much you trust the glass product of Ryan Matthews. I mean, other than last season where he didn't get a lot of snaps and he still had a concussion, he's not the healthiest guy on the football field at any given Sunday. Doesn't make a difference who you got. And if Elliott is there at 8, he's an interesting pick.
He is, because Darren Sproles, at this point in his career, he's always really been a third down back. He's not going to carry the load. Ryan Matthews is too inconsistent health-wise to just rely on him. Rumor has he's on the trade block. That doesn't surprise me, how he wants to get rid of Chip's guys. But on the other hand, Ezekiel Elliott, people are saying that he is the real deal. He can win you games. He is a great blocker. He has a burst of speed and has tremendous vision. And he played at Ohio State. He had offensive linemen that are NFL ready on that line. And he played under Urban Meyer, who's arguably one of the greatest NCAA coaches all time. He knows the system. And Elliott has his troubles as well, though. He's been partying a little too much of Mr. Bosa. That also is cause for concern.
Not only under throwing his coach, play calling, and teammates under in a very big game last season. That was pretty bad for him. That had a really bad look on his reputation. And he's an off-the-field issue. He might be a very off-the-field issue kind of player. And as you know in the draft, sometimes those are good picks, in sense. But when they come to play in the NFL and they got a lot more money than they do in the wallet in college, it doesn't always look out for them. Talk about Jamarcus Russell, how he fell out of the league. Basically fell out of his whole life and then ate his whole life away in a nutshell. But I mean, there's a lot of players who come out that their personality is too big for the NFL. Not talking about Johnny Manziel over here, but
I can see your point, but at the site, I mean, Elliott is such a talented player that he could really be one of two players. Who are you gonna get? Are you gonna get Melvin Gordon, or are you gonna get Todd Gurley? You really don't know what you're gonna get drafting these running backs so high. And the Eagles, yes, they did fill a lot of needs through free agency, and Howie Roseman has done a masterful job filling those needs with the salary cap he was left. He still has to get Fletcher Cox done. That is the priority. He redid Sam Bradford, but the second he really needs to get a left guard, and I don't know how much longer they can wait. Are you really going to plug in Alan Barbary to be your starting left guard after what happened last year? I
no.
don't know. I could see a couple different things but most importantly, if you get Stanley, you stabilize the offensive line. You control the line of scrimmage, and that's what they should focus on. Especially if these tight ends, you're going to say your two tight end sets. You'll have Selleck and Ertz. Ertz most likely is going to be running a pattern half the time or setting up as a wide receiver. So you're not going to have these tight ends chipping these defensive ends or linebackers coming up the field. And that could be a major problem if you don't trust your guard to recognize the blitz is coming up the A gap. And oh crap, I didn't block him. Bradford's on his back. And then next thing you know, you're down to Mark Sanchez, who was just dealt to Denver.
Yep.
So now the Eagles have Chase Daniel. You really trust Chase Daniel?
Yeah, and I mean the offensive line is definitely, there's a reason why it's called battle in the trenches. I mean, you definitely need to have the big body, the talented. You need to have a steady group. I mean, you can look at Dallas. They over numerous years solidified that line, solidified it so good that it didn't really matter who they have. Yeah. They got a guy in Murray who we traded for a 4th round pick. Actually, we swapped 4th round picks for Murray, and that guy had led the league no less than 2 years ago in rushing. That's all because of the line, and that's something that is a huge factor. You need to look at the line, and that's why we both agree that Stanley is definitely your pick.
I mean, if he's there.
If he's there, and we don't think he will go before 8. But Elliott is still it's in your peripheral. It's on the side. You see it on the side, and you're like, it's a flash of light. It's the skill position player, and a lot of people who look at the draft say, it's all about the skill position players. It's all about getting the talented players who can go out and be game changers. And you're not having a game changer by drafting an offensive lineman. He's not a game changer. He's not
the sexiest pick.
Exactly. He's not going to win you games. He's not going to go out there and perform. He's not going to get 150 yards from scrimmage, 2 touchdowns. He's going to have the guy who's blocking number 95 on defense.
Now, let's be honest. Howie Roseman's been hit or miss in the draft. Not everyone's going to own up when they drafted Danny Watkins or a Marcus Smith. It's just not going to happen. But when you hit on a Fletcher Cox or a Deshaun Jackson, everyone raises their hand and said they were on that decision. So I think this is going to be a big draft for Howie Roseman to prove that he is ready to take this on himself. Because if he takes the lineman, he has no excuses. If he becomes Danny Watkins, he's got to take all the blame.
Yep.
Same thing goes with Ezekiel Elliott. If you take a running back in the top 10, he has to guarantee you at least 1,000 yards this year.
Yeah. No, it's true. And part of the problem with taking this sexier pick is it's always the riskier pick. Typically, the top linemen in the draft are there for a reason, and they're typically pretty good throughout their career. And it's definitely the safer pick. If you're taking Stanley, you are definitely getting a safer pick than Elliott, just because of their position. You got the number 2 offensive lineman coming out the draft, who is good. I mean, he's a good player. He's solid. He's gonna be the guy that's gonna get things done for you, especially if you're putting him in an easier position on the line as guard. Because I'm pretty sure we can agree that tackle is the position that goes in the draft first. Definitely not guard. If you're throwing a tackle in a guard position, it's definitely going to help out your line just because you're going to have talent. You're going to have the talent.
But some scouts say that Stanley can't transition from tackle to guard. Do you still bite on Stanley then?
I think you have to, because Peters is old. Peters has hurt his Achilles numerous times. He is at the end of his career.
That's true.
To say nicely he's near the end of the career is probably
34 years old.
Yeah, and he's a little worn torn from that 34-year-old number. But you need a guy to replace him. And when you have this high of a draft pick, yeah, sure, the sexy pick looks great. But let's lock a guy down who might be here for 10 more years and who might be a very solid pick 10 years down the line. You look at Lane Johnson, who was picked 4th overall a few years ago. He's been a stud. He's been an absolute
He's had
stud.
his moments, but for the most part, he's been great at right tackle.
He's been a guy that you can trust. And even when there was a few games he moved in the left tackle, and he looked like a stud there too. He didn't look like there was any sort of problem transitioning from right to left, which makes you happy knowing that Peters might only have a year or two left, if you're lucky.
On the offensive line, it sets up a lot of different things because if you stabilize the line, you're able to get a better running game, and it allows your wide receivers to get down the field. We all know the Eagles had a lot of drops. They led the league in drops.
Oh, boy.
It felt like every game a receiver was dropping every single pass that was thrown to him. I feel bad for Sam Bradford because he should have had so many more yards thrown.
Yeah, and there should have been a lot better completion percentage, a lot more receiver yards. I mean, you can go on and on about the list the wide receivers had. And how much can you blame? You can't really blame the line for receiver drops, but you might be able to blame the line for the passes
For
thrown.
rushing the throw.
Yeah, and some of these throws, they might not, the receivers, and remember, this is a young receivers group. I mean, you had a rookie last year, and you had 2 guys who were in their second year. This is a very young and inexperienced receiving core.
What, Miles Austin wasn't good enough for
you? Miles Austin. Once you go Cleveland, you can't go back. That's what I say. If you put Cleveland in you, that's why I didn't like Pat Shurmur. He was in Cleveland.
But, I mean, Jordan Matthews has his moments. He's going to be good. Zach Ertz is the real deal. But Aguilar, he needs to prove himself this year. He was a first-round pick. He's got to act like it this year. Josh Huff, this is probably your final straw.
Yeah.
If he doesn't come through this year, he's probably the kick returner to start the season, most likely, if he's not dealt before training camp.
Yeah, and we've had our own side discussions about this. We are in very disagreement here. I know a lot of people are on the Huff is not a good player. I personally like Huff, but that's because he just fights. I know he has the fumbling problem and all that stuff, and I'm smiling as I say this, knowing that he does have a lot of issues, but he's raw. I mean, if he can get a little, like...
Well, that's what happens when you play for Chip Kelly at Oregon. All you do is run straight or run a curl or a bubble screen. It's easy. It's 3 patterns.
Yeah, he had a lot of issues adjusting to the play calling and to the playbook, and that was a lot of his issues coming out. And then it became fumbling.
But let's be honest. Huff cost them a couple games. There's no reason he should have had some of these plays that end up going the other way that cost the team.
And I will agree. There were a couple of red zone fumbles and interceptions that bounced right off his hands that I'm sure Eagles fans are killing themselves because they still do remember these plays. But it's hard. I mean,
but you're a professional for a reason.
You're a professional for a reason. You get paid millions of dollars to catch the football. You better damn catch the football. But it does help. If you have this line to solidify you, you get the throws out at a better pace. Your receivers are ready for it. And who knows, maybe some of those balls that are dropped are actually caught this year.
Absolutely. Anything is possible. You got Ezekiel Elliott on the board. It's also possible that the Eagles might trade up. Now, this is another rumor. Carson Wentz has been rumored to go number 2. We have him going number 2 to the Browns. But he might be dealt for that pick. Do you see any reason why the Eagles might go up to number 2?
If I had to pick one reason why, it's because they don't trust Sam Bradford. And as much as they put a lot of guaranteed money into him and into Chase Daniels, don't forget, they signed him for a pretty wealthy contract for a backup quarterback who has been in the league for quite some time. Now, if you don't trust either one of these quarterbacks, which, to my opinion, is a very surprise, you could be moving up to get a guy who might be top 2 talent and have him be third string. And that's not exactly I don't think that's a smart pick, and it's definitely not a sexy pick if you're an Eagles fan.
And how much you're giving up to get the 2.
Exactly. I think we all remember how much the Redskins gave up to the Rams for a guy who's not even on their roster anymore, and that's very scary. That's a really high risk that I'm sure a lot of Eagles fans don't really want to take. And there was a lot of people who last year said that we should trade up for Mariota, and I think it was released recently that
it wasn't confirmed.
Wasn't
there's
confirmed.
Been rumors.
There's been rumors that it was 4 future first-round picks any offensive player and any defensive player, and that's not something I'm willing to give up for anybody. I don't care if
I
it
wouldn't
was
even give up Fletcher Cox for the pick.
if it was Peyton Manning coming out of the draft. I don't think I'd still do it. I don't think I'd give him 4 future first round picks.
People just fall in love with the franchise quarterback
Yeah.
idea, and then if you keep doing that, you're going to end up being the Browns.
Exactly, and
It's just ironic we had the Browns taking him.
We had the Browns taking him, exactly. And I mean, you saw what happened. I mean, the Redskins picked Kirk Cousins in the 4th round. Everyone was like, "Oh my God, why would they pick a second quarterback after trading all of these picks for this quarterback who's supposed to be the face of the future, the face of the franchise, the moneymaker, the guy who's going to bring them to the playoffs and show them the lights?"
All about the system.
Exactly.
It always has been, always will be. RG3 did not fit well into Gruden's system. Cousins knew how to run it. I've been saying this for years. You got to be able to throw the short passes in that style offense. Griffin doesn't do that. He does not mesh well. We'll see what Hugh Jackson can do with him. But maybe Peterson, he could possibly do something with him because they said he's a better fit for what the Eagles are going to do. But at the same time, Chase Daniels is brought in because he knows the offense.
Exactly.
And that's what scares me, though, because Daniels knows the offense really well.
Yep.
Unless they plan on doing something with Bradford, a young quarterback makes sense.
Now, don't forget, Bradford's not that old. He's
just injury prone.
He's injury prone. But the thing about Bradford is that you do have a former overall number 1 overall pick and a guy who looked good at Oklahoma. And he's not you know what? He's on a 2-year deal. He's guaranteed quite a bit of money, which if we're looking at numbers now, Osweiler got
a great deal.
That's a great deal. Osweiler got more money than he did. And you're looking at it now. If you go up and you waste draft picks to draft a potential 3rd string quarterback,
you have to trade one of them. I think Bradford's gone. If you draft a Wentz or a Goff,
one of them's gone.
One of them has to be gone.
And that's not going to agree with that based on you do need some sort of leverage, and there's not many players you're getting for that. I mean, it's only 6 picks in the 1st round, but you're moving from 8 to 2. That is a hefty fine. The Rams only gave up 2 spots to the Redskins back when RG3 went, and they gave up a big price
There's
just
no
so
way
he
the
didn't go to
Eagles
the
would
Browns.
even do that.
I don't know if you remember. Did you know that they moved up in front of the Browns to get RG3?
I don't remember that.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the Browns were the 3rd overall pick that year.
Wow. Just ironic, right?
Not really surprising that the Browns are still kind of in that position that one of the top 5 picks, but that's neither here nor there.
Well, give them some credit. They're in a tough division.
Yeah, they are. They're in a very physical division. But I do not see them trading up. I especially the 2. I see them never trading up the 2. Now, the other interesting thing, if Goff falls to 8, then you don't need to trade up. And then their quarterback's still there.
They just worked him out. So
yeah.
Peterson saw him in action.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of different ways the Eagles could turn just because of the contracts. I mean, you never know what you're going to get out of this Eagles draft with Harry Roseman. We could trade back for all we know again.
I'm not against trading back. If you can trade back to potentially number 10 or number 11 and still get Jack Conklin, the Michigan State tackle / guard, I say go for it and pick up an additional pick because trading Nick Foles for a 2nd round pick that we had to give up with him to get Sam Bradford, it really hurts with this upcoming draft.
It does. It's never fun not having a 2nd round pick. But if you trade back, you could potentially get a 1st and a 2nd round pick back for it in a position where we were already at 13 before this.
Well, it depends how far back they trade.
Exactly. But we were at 13 before we made that deal with the Miami Dolphins. And who knows? I'm not saying Miami's going to want to come up. But if we get around 13 again, we'll be right where we were sitting pretty at the end of the season with maybe a 2nd round pick as well. Mm-hmm. We were, as Eagles fans, we were pretty high on drafting Michigan State Conklin. I mean, it wasn't that far-fetched to get a guy who could play guard and tackle and not have to move anyone. If we could move back and get him and get a 2nd round pick, I think a lot of Eagles fans would be jumping for joy at that point.
Yeah, but it might not be realistic. That's what we're realizing.
That is the other point.
Howie Roseman's come out and said there are 8 elite players in this draft. it just really brings to my mind who would be on the board. You got Hargraves on the board. I think somebody would be willing to trade up for a corner like that. The team that comes to mind is the New York Giants. Remember, the Eagles beat them. They get screwed come draft. Thanks, Chip Kelly. So Shermer,
Actually,
it wasn't Chip Kelly's
Chip
fault.
Kelly.
It was Shermer that won that game. But
yeah,
they would have had number 10.
Yep.
And wouldn't be in that situation.
Yeah. Speaking of that game, Marcus Smith, he was very happy Chip Kelly was gone in that game. Actually, I think if my numbers are right,
he's a wild card. I think he had a sack or two.
He had a sack or two, and he had a couple tackles as well. I mean, he was very happy with Chip, and that might have been. I'm not saying Marcus Smith won them the game.
The game was meaningless.
The game was absolutely meaningless. Now, we're not going to London.
But we are playing Seattle.
And that's probably one of the bigger things that you'd rather look at. But who knows? I mean, if we decide to trade back, I'm not guaranteeing we get anything good for it. We might even get a player if we want a player. But
some say Hargraves is a better fit for the Eagles. I don't see how that's possible with all the corners they've acquired.
We just acquired 2 defensive backs, and we just signed 2 of them. Mm-hmm. We re-signed Nolan Carroll. I mean, you look at this team. We're getting injured. We're getting Shepard back from injury too. We have a lot of guys in the defensive back position that we're getting.
More the merrier.
I mean, more the merrier is always good, but hey, I want players.
I don't blame you. That's why I say the idea of trading back makes a lot of sense. If a team really wants to get up a spot or two, I have to take a long look at it, assuming they're not going to take your guy. That's what I get concerned about. Because if you can trade back a spot or two and still pick up Elliott and get an additional pick on top of it, that might be worth it. Because there's not a lot of teams that would take a top 10 running back.
Yeah, and one of the things I'm looking at is 9 and 10 is Tampa and the Giants. Now, I don't think the Giants are going to want to make a deal with us. And I honestly think...
Well, the Eagles have made deals before. They made it with the Cowboys. It's not out of the ordinary.
It's not far-fetched to say that they would make a deal with a divisional team. But other than that, I don't know how far back they'd want to go.
It's definitely not far.
Yeah, they don't want to move really far out of the first round because they talked about having one of their top 8. But let's say there's some sort of shakeup where they have 2 or 3 of their top 8 at 8. They feel like they can move back a couple slots to get one of those guys.
Maybe a 3rd round pick again.
I mean that's
back into the second
huge.
Round.
That's huge, and we'll talk more about what the Giants and the Bucs want later. But that's a big deal if we can move back and still get a guy that we want. That's a big deal. That is easily possible. Everyone knows the draft. You know, it's kind of like your March Madness. Kind of tear it up because who knows what's going to happen.
Anything is possible. Some team might fall in love with Ezekiel Elliott and really, really want him. Now, what are you willing to give up for him is a different story.
Exactly.
But the Eagles have to listen to all offers.
Yeah, I think no offer is off the table by that means, even whether that's moving up or moving back. I don't know if they move up all the way to 2. That's like saying moving back, to 15.
Personally, you trade up to 2, I want Ramsey or Tunsil. Because if you're able to get up to 2, Ramsey's the best defensive back on the board.
Yeah, that's true.
And if Tunsil's at 2, and they decide to take Ramsey at 1, are you really going to pass up a franchise left tackle? It's a lot to take in. But what are you willing to move up those 6 spots?
That's a lot.
That's a lot for
a
tackle. Depends how far he is from the other guys. Because we've talked about Bosa's problems for how much of a talented player. If he's available at 8, I rush the podium again because he is a force on the defensive line. There are several options in play.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that can go wrong with 8 and go right with 8 as well. I mean, you could have all of your guys taken. I mean, they said top 8 talent, but I'm sure they want one guy over another at some point here or there. And whoever the Eagles pick, I mean, look at the top 8 players. There's a lot of great talent. There really is a lot of great talent. And just because they don't get the guy that all the Eagles fans want, which some say is Ezekiel Elliott, some say is a tackle in Stanley, some say could be the corner in Hargraves. If you really want a quarterback that bad, maybe Golfer Wentz, depending on if one of them or both of them might possibly, not probable, but possibly fall. There's a lot of options. And
Mm-hmm.
as you saw, Howie Roseman does not mind trading up or back in the draft. I mean, he's done it many times over his career as a GM here. He did it this season, giving up a lot of cap, which was great for us.
It cleared a lot of space, which was smart, but it did leave a lot of holes on the team.
It did. It's true. And you still have your right now he's your number one running back, Ryan Matthews, on the trade block. I mean, he might be packaged in a deal for some picks too. You never know. It could be easily as that. It could happen in 5 minutes during draft day. The war room is a very tricky situation.
On the second hand, I'm okay. Ryan Matthews and Sproles are my 1-2 punch in the backfield, and I got a solid offensive line. Sign me up.
Yeah, sounds great to me. I would love to be watching that offensive lineman go to work being drafted by the Eagles. I think that is probably the smartest and safest pick that we could have in this draft so far, with all the players set in mind. That could potentially fall to 8, trade up, trade back, whatever you want to do. I think the best pick is to go with Stanley.
Number 8, the Philadelphia Eagles select Ronnie Stanley, offensive tackle. The Eagles are moving the guard from Notre Dame.